I've been covering Judea and Samaria for the past 5 years, and I've been writing articles about Israel for the past 10. Initially, what drew me to cover Judea and Samaria was what I saw to be a very gross and misleading portrayal of the settlement community in mainstream international media. I felt that there was a dire need to spotlight inspiring human stories from this region that were either overlooked or completely ignored. In other words, I wanted to help provide a more balanced and complete picture into life in these parts. I remember one particular experience that really highlighted this situation for me. When I was a college student, I was working as a research assistant for a journalist in Jerusalem, and he had me research the media portrayal of the Israeli settlement community in Australia. So every day I would come to the office, and there'd be a pile of newspapers from Australia, the leading newspapers there, and I'd go on news sites as well. And I'd go through the headlines, and I would see what kind of articles were being written on Judea and Samaria. And of course, the headlines were awful, but the images, the photos that accompanied these articles were even worse. I can remember clearly there's usually one type of photo that accompanied each article, and it was of a settler, usually a religious man, okay, with a long grizzled beard, side locks, a large knitted kippah, wearing jeans, always holding a weapon, and herding sheep. At this very moment, if you want to Google search the word Israeli settler, what you will find is a very similar image. Usually, in the top search page, you'll find an Israeli settler is usually an Israeli man, okay, Jewish man holding a gun, dressed religiously. You'll also find wives in the same scenario, religious women with guns, children as well. There's this one photo of a child pointing a gun with his father's help, wearing a kippah, of course, and many images showing settlers scuffling with IDF soldiers and police. And alongside those photos, you also have a nice spread of photos of Palestinian children on stretchers, on the way to the hospital. Final conclusion is the settlement community in Israel is a pretty violent one. It's a pretty confrontational one. Now, as someone who has traveled frequently in Judea and Samaria, the people I have met are so vastly different from those images, or even those file photos that are often used to accompany articles in international media related to the settler movement. And as a writer for Tzpit Press Service, TPS, and a contributor to the Jewish Post, as well as other local and overseas publications, and being a featured blogger for the Huffington Post in the past, I strive to bring a very different kind of story from Judea and Samaria to the attention of the wider public. One of the most interesting angles for me as a journalist in covering Judea and Samaria is actually reporting on the efforts for peaceful relations that exist among some settlers and Palestinians, including some very unique stories in Gush Etzion. I'd like to discuss some of these stories with you here today, but first I'd like to say a few words about myself. I grew up in a reality very different from the Middle East, as many people who have made Aliyah from America know. I grew up in Maine, in a small town called Calais, 2 hours north of Bangor, right on the Canadian border. We're surrounded by peaceful lakes and forests, moose, deer. We go fishing. Small town America, very, very peaceful, friendly Canadian neighbors. My family was the only Jewish family in my town. And while Israel was an important subject in my home, I didn't really come across it much outside my home. My mom being Israeli, she spoke with us in Hebrew, and we followed Israel closely on the news. But that changed one day in high school. As I said, Israel wasn't something that I talked about with my friends so much, wasn't something that came up in school. But we went to hear, I think this was when I was in the 10th grade, we went to hear a London-based Canadian journalist by the name of Gwyn Dyer, who to this day is a respected, syndicated international columnist and author who has also written extensively on Israel and the Palestinians. Now, I don't remember the exact content of what he said that day, but I remember that he made a comment about Israel that was extremely misleading, and I questioned him about it during the question and answer session. Now, I was a teenager back then, and, it was about 15 years ago, but I can still recall the shock that I experienced that such distorted information about Israel could reach my quiet Maine Canadian bubble. Fast forward, I graduated high school, moved to Israel, following a year of national service, got a degree in Bar Ilan, and began covering rocket life in Sderot with Sderot Media Center for a few years, and then continued on to getting my teaching certificate and working as a teacher in Jerusalem, and alongside that, continuing with my journalistic writing. I began working for Tetzpete Press Service, TPS, and that's when I really began to get to know the communities and the people of Judea and Samaria. And I'd like to highlight a couple of stories from the hundreds that I've written during this time. One of the first profile stories from Judea and Samaria, which actually ran in the Huffington Post and the Jewish press, was of a doctor named Yitzchak Glick from Gush Etzion. Now, I accompanied Dr. Glick from Efrat, who also established the Efrat Emergency Medical Center, to a nearby Palestinian village, where I got to see firsthand the friendly relations that existed between this kippah-wearing doctor and the Arab villagers. Dr. Glick provides free medical treatment and pays house calls to 6 different Palestinian villages in the area of Efrat. And as we drove through Wadi Nis, locals were smiling and waving at Dr. Glick, recognizing his vehicle. One villager, a construction worker, who Dr. Glick treated for injuries after a fall from a building, stopped and got out of his car, gave him a big bear hug, and they talked like old friends. I'd like to say that at no point during our visit to the village did I feel unsafe. There was a very warm and friendly atmosphere and mutual respect that I witnessed between Dr. Glick and these Palestinian villagers. I can remember one sentence that Dr. Glick said during the interview with me at the coffee shop at the Gush Etzion Junction following the visit, which was something I also used in the article. He said that there were so many stories like this that happen daily, and that they show another side of reality where Jewish and Arab residents live together and do their best for each other. Now, to me as a reporter, Dr. Glick's story was gold. It's a story that deserved international spotlight. It's what real human empathy is all about, and it showed also how effective relationships between 2 different groups of people can develop and inspire others. I have to say that I found Dr. Glick's story so inspiring that with TPS I organized a tour for international journalists so that they could see Dr. Glick's reality themselves. We had a small group, and we went with Dr. Glick to a neighboring Palestinian village. And in this group of journalists, we also had a German freelance journalist who left in the middle of the tour when she realized that the tour was going to highlight the positive relations between Israeli settlers and Palestinians. And that was just something that left an impression on me. In another article that I had an opportunity to write, I covered the secular settlers of Judea and Samaria, which make up 1/3 of the population here. Not something that's very known. And, you'll never find photos of secular Jewish residents in this region who dress like people walking on the waterfronts of Tel Aviv on Google search. One person that I interviewed was Natalie Hershkovitz. She's originally from Tel Aviv, who lives in Barkan, a secular communal settlement in southern Samaria, adjacent to the Barkan Industrial Park, which has 120 businesses and factories that employ about 3,000 Palestinians from the area. She described to me her family as religiously secular and told me that, we're not religious fanatics. Destroying olive trees just doesn't happen here. There are academics and small business owners who live in our yeshuv, and our children serve in elite army units. Other interesting people that I've interviewed over the years have included Maayan Shar, a mom from Esh Kodesh who runs a successful sushi business, selling sushi rolls across Samaria. Yael Farbstein from Dumim, whose honey won an international honey tasting contest in North Carolina this year. Shlomo Keshet, the owner of Saboneto and Kochava Shachau, whose soaps reach different corners of the world thanks to an organization called Lev Olam. And that markets packages of products from Judea and Samaria internationally. But one of the most interesting figures that I've got to interview is Sheikh Ibrahim Abu al-Hawa, a Palestinian Muslim who is very close friends with the late Rabbi Menachem Froman of Tekoa, a peace activist. Abu al-Hawa, who resides in the Mount of Olives, told me that he had a very close friendship with Rabbi Froman, and together they worked to spread the message of hope and peace. God gave Rabbi Froman a special gift to spread love between people, Abu al-Hawa told me in the interview. There are countless more stories that I'd like to share with you here today about Judea and Samaria and some of the amazing people that make up the community here from all folds, religious and secular, liberal and conservative, veteran Israelis and new immigrants. But the most important point that I'd like to make is that there is such a wide range of diverse people that live here. You will not find them in the Google search engine, and unfortunately, not in the coverage of the New York Times, but you will find them if you're looking in the hills and valleys of Judea and Samaria. Thank you.